This conference will now be recorded.
Charvik, I'm audible?
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah. As an annual feature, we have been having the budget meeting. Besides the budget meeting, we have been having study circle meetings and the webinars which we have been organizing in the recent past. The main objective of the association has been imparting of the knowledge, sharing knowledge, and disseminating the information which is useful for the professionals in the day-to-day working. It's this objective that the association was formed and is still continuing at a higher stage. We need the support of all the new members whom we request to enroll as members and come forward and take up the stage, address us on some subjects of their liking. With this opening remarks, I would also like to touch upon the audit, which is going to be different from the corporate audit what we have been doing year after year. It is because of this COVID that certain changes have been included in the setup. And for this, we have a lovely, highly experienced speaker in the form of Shri Hasmukhbhai Dedia, whom we are going to listen shortly. With this, I request Charvik to please introduce the speaker of the day. Thank you and hope you have a very enriching evening.
Thank you, Ghanshyam Bhai. As rightly said by Ghanshyam Bhai Lalka, our today's speaker, CA Hasmukh Dedia, has over 35 years of professional experience in handling audit, tax matters, and business restructuring assignment for several clients. He is associated with several professional, social, and charitable organizations like CTC. He's in CTC, that is Chamber of Tax Consultants. He's a co-opted member on its several subcommittees from 2005 to 2000, and currently Vice Chairman of Corporate Laws Committee. He's also a member of CVO, Chartered Accountant and Cost Accountants Association, and he was a president for the term 2006-7. He has served WRC of ICAI as a co-opted member on its several subcommittees from 2001 to 2004. He is a faculty member and paper writer of various seminars, workshops, residential courses held by WRC of ICAI, CTC, and various other organizations. He has also co-authored various books on union budget and other subjects of professional interest, like Survey under Income Tax Act, Registration and Formation of Companies, and many more other books. With this brief introduction, let us welcome CA Hasmukh Dedia. And without spending much time, I would request Hasmukh Dedia sir to start with the session.
A very good evening to all the participants who are present today. Good evening to the President Lalka Sahib. Thanks, Charvik, for giving me this opportunity of refreshing myself. So the subject that has been given to me, although Lalka Sahib mentioned company audit, but it is not company audit. Select provisions of company accounts and company audit. And of course, the hot topic of today, the COVID impact of it on accounts and audit, which in a way can be a subject matter for the whole session until one may not complete. I'll try to do that. Before coming to the subject, just to set the context that what are we into? Like many of you are already dealing with company either as auditor or as accountant or as consultants or as advisors. This thing. You are aware that 1956 Act was replaced by Companies Act 2013. Most of the Act was made effective from 1/4/2014. The recodification of Companies Act was, I think, started more than 10 years back, perhaps during Prime Minister Vajpayee's tenure. So government took 10 years to think about what changes, what should be there, what should not be there. In that process, several bills came and gone, revised again, put for public thought or opinion, and again revised, again revised. In the end, when Companies Act was actually codified, there was an unprecedented hurry in which the act was passed, because UPA 2 government was towards its last few days, and that's the time it got passed a bit hurriedly. The act was, of course, made in the background of a Satyam, infamous Satyam scam, which actually, Indian financial world ko hila diya tha. So act has some impact of those this thing. But with that, several anomalies remain in the act. So as a result, what happened that the act which got passed in 2013 made effective from 1/4/14. Some sections, of course, some bit earlier. But then thereafter, every year you had an amendment act. You had a Companies Act, 2014 Amendment Act, you had 2015 Amendment Act, 2017 Amendment Act is still in a pipeline. Some of those are already effective, some of those are not effective. So in the name of simplification, in the name of lessening the criminal offenses or those kind of matters, in the name of ease of doing business, in the name of government may not say so, but correcting the mistakes done in a hurriedly passed law, all several changes are made. So therefore, one has to keep track of what is updated position, and therefore this is a welcome step of the organizers to at least look at the accounts and audit pertaining provisions, so that we can properly justify our role, whether it be accountant, whether it be auditors, whether it be consultants. So therefore, stringent compliance related regulations are there in the Companies Act and entire corporate law regulatory provisions framework. The SEBI regulations, of course, applicable to listed companies. Then you have RBI regulating the entire financial world, including NBFCs and all. Because regulations are stringent, the non-compliance thereof will have to meet the severe consequences like penalties and imprisonment, etc. Not that the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India was not a tough regulator. It is, and it was always a tough regulator. But government somehow thought to delink the regulatory portion of the audit quality, audit enhancement, and audit discipline to be given to a separate regulator, National Financial Reporting Authority, NAFRA. As you all know, it has already been set up and it has started working. So we have now a tougher regulator. Of course, NAFRA's jurisdiction is on listed companies and some of the large companies, not all companies. So Institute will continue to be a regulator for the rest of the corporate world. All this together has resulted in occurrences of resignation by auditors in the midst of their tenure. Why is this happening? Earlier, we didn't hear of resignation of auditor. Number one, appointment was made year to year, AGM to AGM. Now you have appointment of 5 years or 10 years, as the case may be, if proprietor or if firm. Number two, the penal consequences and other consequences, the ban on the professional life of a profession for 10 years. All these powers are very, very stringent. And the corporate world, the failure of the business, the competition, the not matching the target, sometimes compels them to do some, what we call bring art into the accounting presentation, and that's where auditors and auditees perhaps may not see an eye to eye. Not that this was not happening earlier, but in earlier years, ways and means were found out. The fear of the regulation was not so much. And now that all this is there, we find the occurrences of resignations. So much so that Institute and SEBI both have to come out with some guidelines about when you resign, what to do and how to do, and when not to resign, etc. If one goes by the audit quality review, the only audit quality review done by the new regulator, that is NAFRA, in case of ILFS, audit done by Deloitte Haskins Sells, the report is already there in the public domain for last few months. if one goes by that, one may not agree fully with all the conclusions, but at least it gives a sense of regulatory mindset as to what is expected of a statutory auditors, or what is expected from the onerous function professionals by the regulator. And those are scary, and therefore one will have to make the base very strong of the regulatory framework of the Companies Act pertaining to accounts and financial reporting. MCA is also aware of all these issues, and therefore they have also come out with a consultation paper on the audit threats. They have invited the public comments. This came somewhere in the February, 7th of February. The public comments were invited. I think because of the lockdown followed in March or so, this process may have slowed down, but MCA may also be looking to make some more changes having regard to this. So that brings me to what organizers have, the role they have given to me. So yes, company law, chapter 9, dealing with accounts of the companies, not entire chapter, but select sections. And chapter 10, audit and auditors, of course, the entire chapter. And the third topic is, why are we meeting over a video conferencing, and why are we not meeting in an auditorium to have this meeting where I would have been more comfortable seeing you and eye contact and welcoming a question in between my talk, because that's how the presentations becomes always interesting. It is not one-sided. The reason for that is, as we all know, the COVID-19, which has restricted our movements, and we are forced to, rather compelled to, resort to the digital medium of meeting. Not only meeting, completing several of our work, including statutory audit of listed companies and all other companies, and also the tax filings and regulatory work. Impact of COVID-19, as I said, the subject by itself can take one full session. I'll try to justice that as much as. So I have divided this into this way: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I believe organizers would be giving the presentation or circulating the presentation to the participants. Therefore, I might jump onto some of the simple things and only focus on some of the issues part of it. So first part, books of account and relevant books and papers and financial statements are supposed to be kept by the company at registered office. The old act did not have many of these definitions so very clearly. The new act defines both the terms books of account as also books and papers. So books and papers defined by section 2 subsection 12 to mean the books of account. So books of account is part of books and papers. The minute books, the registers, vouchers, documents, agreements, all this total together is the books and papers. Books of account defined by section 213, 2 subsection 13 is pretty much same as 1956 Act. That is again an inclusive definition, that it means records of all sums of money received and expended and the matters relating thereto, all sales and purchase of goods and services transacted by the company, all assets and liabilities of the company, and items of cost records mandated under section 148. As some of you may already be aware that section 148 and rules made thereunder mandate some of the companies, some classes of the companies to mandatorily maintain the cost records. Wherever companies have a branches, obviously the returns from the branches for the transactions undertaken at the branches are supposed to be kept and included or inserted appropriately in the accounts at the registered office. If company decides not to keep or to keep some of the records, some of the documents or accounting records at a place other than the registered office, the board can decide that, and the obligation on the company is to intimate about that to ROC by filing Form AOC 5 within a week. We all know that companies are mandatorily have to follow the accrual basis of accounting and not the cash or not the hybrid kind of method. It's purely accrual according to double entry bookkeeping. Books of accounts are always supposed to be open for directors for inspection, etc. And the law requires every company to keep the books of accounts for 8 years in good orders. That is current year plus 8 past year. So it could be 8 plus 1 or 8 plus part of the one. Central government in some cases can direct the companies to maintain the books of account for a longer period in cases where there is a ongoing cases or investigation or SFIO or some other regulatory part is going. The boxes on the right side of the slides would give details about the consequences of any contravention or non-compliance with the provisions of this. I'll not deal with them because those can be read because I don't want to frighten people. We are in profession and we'll continue to not get into any contravention knowingly. So again, books of account to be are now permitted. In fact, earlier also were permitted by way of a circular and notification. Now the Act itself recognizes the electronic medium of keeping of the books of account. Had it not been so, wonder how we would have completed the audits in a lockdown period that we are all going through. So there are some conditions about the digital maintenance to be retained in the original format of receipt and sent, retrievable in a complete and unaltered medium, documents to be displayed in a legible form, and companies will have to evolve a proper system of storage, retrieval, display, printout, etc. Those companies for any reasons were maintaining it on a digital medium but having service the servers not in India, maybe elsewhere elsewhere than India, like many companies in earlier years we noticed were having their servers in Singapore or Gulf countries for various reasons. Now the Act makes it mandatory that wherever you may maintain, but backup of all that you are maintaining in a server located outside India should be there in a server located in India. Very important requirement along with the approval for a digital record is that company on an annual basis should inform ROC about the name, IP address and location of the service provider who is entrusted with maintenance of the backup servers, etc. If cloud-based server is there, in that case address as provided by the service provider will have to be informed to the. That brings me to financial statements. As I said, there were not many definitions in the old Act. The new Act has clarified about that, and therefore section 2 subsection 40 defines financial statement to include balance sheet, profit and loss account or income and expenditure, cash flow, statement of changes in equity or what we call SOCI, which is for those companies who have adopted Ind AS, IFRS converged accounting standards. The SOCI is also one of the statement which is forming part of the financial statement. SOCI, by the way, is nothing but shareholders' funds, movement of the shareholders' funds. And of course, significant accounting policy and other notes. The financial statement should provide true and fair view of the state of affairs, comply with accounting standards. So there are two framework of the accounting standards presently prevailing in India. One is IGAAP, the old standard that we are aware of, which were notified under section 133. The new standards, those are IFRS converged, the Ind AS. So for short form, we'll say Ind AS or IGAAP. Whichever framework is applicable to the company, the financial statement should be in the form and giving disclosures as per Schedule 3. On the box on the right hand side mentions that section 129(1) is not applicable to insurance company, banking companies, generation or supply of electricity or any such class of company for which financial statement format has been included in the respective act regulating such business of such companies. So such companies have their own formats, have their own regulations. They don't have to comply to 129(1). If for any reason financial statements are not complying with any of the accounting standards or Ind AS, the reasons for that deviation with impact will have to be disclosed in the financial statement. And at every annual general meeting, board is duty bound to lay before the general meeting the standalone financial statement as well as a new development, that is consolidated financial statement. Cash flow statement, earlier private companies or those accountants or auditors dealing with private companies or unlisted public companies may not be preparing it, but now the act makes it mandatory, and therefore cash flow statement will have to be prepared, because earlier there was no financial statement definition, and the AS3 cash flow was actually applicable only to non-SMC companies, and therefore we were not preparing. Now we'll have to prepare cash flow also as part of the financial statement. Of course, that is not applicable to one-person company and small private companies. That brings me to a new phenomena that is brought under the Companies Act, the consolidated financial statement. So all the companies having subsidiary or associate or GP are mandated to prepare consolidated financial statement. The underlying portion is brought in by the 2017 Amendment Act, which I just referred to. Effectively, that was always the position in terms of the Rule 6 to company account rule. So we always thought it that way, that even CFS will have to be kind of comply to the accounting standards. Despite CFS being prepared, presented, approved by the members at the general meeting, the companies that continue to require companies to file a separate statement akin to old Companies Act Section 2012. A salient features of the financial statement of its subsidiaries, associates, etc. in the form AOC 1, Rule 5 requires companies to file it with ROC. Schedule 3, which gives the format of the company's financial statement, Part 3 has been included from 2014, which deals with consolidated financial statement. So therefore, format of the CFS is also prescribed in there. Companies which for any reason are not preparing CFS or not required to prepare CFS, they have been duty bound to say that it is sufficient if the company complies with provisions of CFS as provided in Schedule 3. And what is that? I'll come to that in the next slide. Needless to say that CFS should be in the same form and a manner as that of the parent company, that is holding company. If for any reason any subsidiary or associate or JV is not considered for consolidation, the names and reasons for the same will have to be disclosed in the consolidated financial statement. Earlier, consolidated financial statements were not required by the law. It was applicable only to the listed company by virtue of SEBI's regulation, SEBI's LODR regulations or listing regulations. But now Companies Act itself requires company to prepare and present the CFS. Therefore, many of you may have noted that earlier in the pre-old Act, the report on the consolidated financial statement was addressed to the board of directors. Now it is addressed to the shareholders, because shareholders only approve this. The definition of associate is there in Section 2.6. I'll come to that in some other slide, in some other perspective. But enough here to say that definition of associate is such which includes JV also. So we just see a small thing, that there is a holding company H, there is a subsidiary company S, and there is a step down subsidiary company S1. So if one reads the 129.3, both H as well as S will have to prepare the consolidated financial statement. H consolidating S as well as S1, and S consolidating S1. Now, S, or what we call it, intermediary consolidation, intermediary consolidation is exempted by the Companies Act and the relevant rules, that is Rule 6, subject to some conditions. So what are those conditions? If it is a wholly owned subsidiary or even a partly owned subsidiary, if ultimate consolidation is made by the ultimate parent for all the entities in the group or in the family taken together, and the intervening subsidiary, in this case like S Limited, is itself not a listed company, then it need not prepare a consolidated financial statement because H is preparing it and filing it with ROC. If H Limited is not a wholly owned subsidiary of H, but a partly owned subsidiary, in that case also this exemption is given, provided the other shareholders of H Limited, because it is partly owned, so there would be some other shareholders, agree that consolidation is not necessary for S, and they agree in writing, and they will not take objection to that. So this exemption is also available under the accounting Ind AS 110. The same principles are followed, which are now brought into the. I earlier mentioned those companies who are not preparing consolidation for any reason, or those who are preparing consolidation, they will have to mandatorily give this table, which is a summarized information about the entire group, about the net assets, that is total asset minus total liabilities, and profit and loss. So how much percentage is that of a parent itself? How much is that of a subsidiaries? That is all taken together, will have to be bifurcated between Indian subsidiaries and foreign subsidiaries. How much of it relates to the minority interest, or what we call NCI, non-controlling interest, associates, again to be bifurcated, Indian, foreign, JV, again to be bifurcated. So this table is very, very important. In the total I have written 100, that is not in the format. It is I have written in this slide to convey the message that total of this two should always be 100, which means that the numbers to be reported in this table are after the consolidation, which would be post elimination of intergroup balance, intercompany balances, intercompany transactions. Some companies misread this, and therefore the total do not come to 100. It may be interesting for the participants to know that the leading company like Reliance Industries in the first year had made a mistake, and this table showed more than 100, that is 142 or something. Thereafter, of course, now the position is clear that this is after elimination, so total in both these cases would be 100, and accordingly we'll have to give this summarized format of the report. Let us look at some of the practical issues that you may encounter. Sorry?
No, please continue.
Yeah. So some of the practical issues that one may encounter in course of the consolidation. So it is possible that an Indian company has a foreign subsidiary in say Singapore, subsidiary Gulf countries, or some European countries, etc. In that case, the format of those companies, subsidiary companies, would be in accordance with that particular jurisdiction under which it operates, and therefore it would be different. So before consolidation, it will have to be first adjusted to make it suitable for consolidation. Different reporting formats also may be encountered. Supposing a bank or an NBFC or an insurance company
Hasmukh sir, we are not able to see your PPT.
I thought there was some. Give me a minute.
In the taskbar, there is a PPT option. No, you minimize Google Chrome.
Okay.
Minimize everything. In the taskbar, there is a PPT which is running. You have to just click on that.
Sorry. So sorry for this. Yeah. So bank and insurance company, if they are your subsidiaries, and they have, obviously, as we saw, they do not follow 129(1) or Schedule 3. They have their own format of the financial statements. If such entities had to be consolidated as a subsidiary or an associate or JV, their financial statement also would first need to be converted or consolidated or adjusted in the form of Schedule 3, so as to make it fit for consolidation. Like what we say, like items can be added of the parent as also the subsidiaries. Different financial years, it is possibility that parent has a April to March, some subsidiary which is December, some subsidiaries which is different. So AS21 permits the time gap of 6 months. Ind AS 110, which deals with consolidation under Ind AS, permits time gap of 3 months. Beyond that, if it is there, those subsidiaries will have to be kind of preparing interim financial so as to facilitate the consolidation. The guidance note prepared by the Institute on a consolidated financial statement is very, very important and gives a good guidance. Some of the uniform practices about preparation are facilitated because of this guidance note. Similarly, there's an education material on Ind AS 110. Again, a very, very good publication of Institute, which must be referred to by those chartered accountants who are dealing with companies' accounts or this thing. One issue which is not there in this slide, but I would like to discuss is when a non-corporate entity is a subsidiary, which is possible, then what to do? Like supposing a company is in a partnership with somebody, company owns 70%, that somebody owns 30%. Obviously, the partnership company has a control on that. So therefore, it becomes a subsidiary and will have to be kind of consolidated. Here is where I would like to draw the attention of the members about the definition lacuna, that when Companies Act defines subsidiary in section 2 subsection 87 or the holding company in section 2 subsection 46, it gives a definition pretty much in the same way as we understand, but in the end it says that such entities include other body corporate. But that is not stated in case when the definition comes to associate. So that means only companies can be associate of a company, which may not be practically correct this thing, because large number of JVs are entered into, particularly you would find it in infrastructure or builder developers cases and all. Large number of JVs could be either LLP, could be partnership firms. If company is associate there, it will have to be considered for consolidation under the provisions of the respective accounting standard, that is AS21 or AS 110 as the case may be. Sorry, I'm again perhaps my navigation isn't supporting me. If you can help, Charvit.
Okay. So just click on the PPT and then it will click on anywhere on the PPT. Now try.
Thanks. So financial statement, both standalone and consolidated, to be approved by the board before they are given to the auditors for final signature, etc. So question is, who signs the financial statement for and on behalf of the company? In case of OPC, obviously the one person who's owning that. In case of other companies, the chairman, MD, and any two directors where there is MD, out of that two, MD should be there. So in nutshell, that chairman, if he is authorized to sign the financial statement, yes. Any two directors, one of whom, if there is MD. Then some of the companies, as you know, under provisions of the Companies Act, they have to appoint mandatorily CEO, CFO, and CS. If they are appointed, those also become signatories to the financial statements. Here, a clarification is needed that CEO, even if he is not a member of the board, he must sign the financial statement. This has been clarified by Amendment Act 2017. That was always the position by virtue of normal understanding and by virtue of one of the clarifying circular of the ROC. Now it is put in the Act only. Audit report obviously is attached to the financial statement, that is both standalone and CFS. Board to submit it to the general meeting for approval. Central government permits and has prescribed abridged board reports for OPC and SPC. Will not deal with those companies because not of much practical relevance. In the COVID scenario where movements are restricted, digital signatures can be put by both the signatories to the financial statement by the for and on behalf of the company, as also by the auditors. This was always the position. This has been clarified by ICAI that yes, if you are unable to move, then on a digital copy you affix your digital signature and file it, or hand it over, or file it with the stock exchanges. That brings me to an important topic, board report. I'll deal with it mainly because I'm told that large number of small and medium practitioners assist their audit company clients in complying with and in preparation of board report as well. So therefore, OPC is something that they have very short board report. They have only to contain a response to the auditor's qualification, etc. So let's talk about other companies. First of all, who signs the board report? The chairman is authorized, MD and one other director. This is the provisions of the act. If board decide that for entire board one person will sign, that person could be chairman, that person could be MD, that person could be director, then that person signs. Of course, impact of contravention in terms of fine, imprisonment, etc. is there on the right-hand side box. So what and all should be contained in the board report is important for us chartered accountants, whether we play a role as auditor and consultant, whether we play a role as accountant. So this is all that web address of the company, if there is website, and where the annual return filed with ROC can be accessed. Number of meetings of the board that have happened from the last board report to this board report. Director's responsibility statement, we shall deal with this in a later slide. If there is any fraud reported by the auditor, which is not the fraud which should be reported by the auditor to central government, we will discuss about that. So if any such occurrence is there during the year, board report should also contain a detail on it. All the statements here with hashtag, they are such, they do not apply to companies other than listed companies and some other prescribed companies. So those prescribed companies are those which are prescribed under section 178. What we loosely call is, one is listed company, others are public interest companies. Though Companies Act does not use that terminology of public interest companies, but it says that some of the provisions of the Act would apply to listed companies as also certain other prescribed companies. Who are those prescribed companies under section 178 or 177? The public company having paid up share capital of 10 crore or more, turnover of 100 crore or more, loan, deposit or debenture. That means borrowing in the form of loans, public deposits or debentures of 50 crores or more. If company has this, many of the provisions of that they apply to listed companies would apply to these companies also, pertaining to having audit committee, independent directors, and several other provisions. So statement on declaration by IDs is one such thing which applies only to those companies. Policy on directors, appointment, remuneration, etc. Explanation or comment on each qualification or adverse comments or disclaimer made by the auditor in the, or either statutory auditor or a company secretary in the secretarial audit. The details pertaining to loan, guarantee and investment, which are covered under section 186, will have to be contained in the board report. Contracts arrangement with related party under section 188, for which company is required also to file form AOC2. State of company's affairs, that is summarized balance sheet or shareholders funds. Amount transferable to any reserves, amount of proposed dividend, material changes or commitment affecting the financial position between the last report and this report. Then there are these three items which are there in the old act also about board's statement about conservation of energy technology, absorption, forex earnings and outgo. development and implementation of risk management policy. Surprisingly, this applies to all the companies. That is what SMC and SMPs, we are all small and medium professionals, will have to keep this in mind. Details of CSR policy and initiatives taken during the year. And if CSR is not spent or short spent, then the reasons or rationale for that. This position is changing from this 2017 Amendment Act, because CSR not spending is consequences for CSR not spent or short spent are made more stringent. They are not applicable up to the March 20, therefore will not deal with it. If any question is there, I'll deal with it. Manner in which formal annual evaluation or performance of the board as a whole, its committee, audit committee, etc., obviously applies only to those companies which are supposed to have independent directors and audit committee, etc. The summary of the financials, the change in the nature of business, if any, during the year, details of directors or KMP, if any changes have happened in those details will have to be given. Statement regarding opinion of the board regarding integrity, expertise, and experience of the independent directors, again applies to only those companies who are supposed to have. Names of the companies within the group, if there is a change in the group, some subsidiaries have ceased to be subsidiaries, some companies, some subsidiaries, new subsidiaries have become. So those kind of changes will have to be part of the board report. Details related to deposits covered under Chapter 5, that is Section 75 to 78. Any public deposits which are accepted not in compliance with provisions of 5, board will have to contain in its report. Details of significant and material orders passed by the regulators or courts or tribunal impacting the going concern or status of the company's operation, if any. Details regarding cost records, if it is mandatory for the company to be preparing that. And of course, what we commonly call is a Vishakha law, that is prevention of a sexual harassment of the woman at workplace. What steps company have taken for this? So those companies which are not for profit company, what we used to call Section 25 company, now Section 8 company, to them some of these provisions do not apply. Further, a very welcome clarification has been made that if any disclosures which are required to be put in the board's report, if they are already there in the financial statement, or some of the policies on directors or policy on CSR, if they are already there somewhere, either on the website or in the financial statement, they did not be again repeated in the board report of the board. A reference to that is enough. Director's responsibility statement, something with which all practicing chartered accountants are already acquainted. I'll not deal with in detail. So broadly, the items are whether accounting standard has been followed or not, if there's a departure, why so, and what is the impact of that. Directors will have to state in that accounting policy and all the policies, whether followed consistently, uniformly, judgment and estimates are reasonable, prudent, whether directors have taken adequate care of maintenance of adequate accounting records, safeguarding the assets, detecting the fraud and other irregularities, annual accounts going concern basis was there or not. Listed company will have to give a proactive statement in the board report about IFC, internal financial control. This is under provisions of Section 134(5)(e). Companies other than listed companies and those companies to whom those provisions apply, they will have, board of those companies will have to comment on ICFR, internal control over financial reporting. This is provided under Rule 8, small 8 of the account rule. I presume that we all know the difference between ICFR and IFC. ICFR is subset of IFC. IFC is entire gamut of the financial controls operating within the company, be it financials or be it operational. Whereas ICFR confines itself only to the financial record maintenance and financial reporting aspect. So to give an example, company may have some business rule about vendors. company may have some policies that who can be admitted as approved vendors. Now that is part of IFC, may or may not be part of ICFR. That's the difference. So entire IFC listed companies will have to report, other companies will have to give a comment on ICFR. Similarly, auditors are also in their audit report are supposed to, for all the companies, supposed to give report on ICFR. And directors have to state that they have devised a proper system and compliance according to the compliance requirement of all the applicable laws. That brings me to an important topic, internal audit within the Companies Act. Earlier, Companies Act was silent about this. Only in CARO, the old CARO, statutory auditors were expected to comment on the adequacy of the internal audit. Now, Companies Act has this provision, section 138(1), which says that board of directors will have to appoint internal auditors. Who can be internal auditor? A chartered accountant, a cost accountant, or other professional. Now, this other professional term is not defined anywhere in the Act. Because it has something to do with the regulatory, the term will have to be understood in its proper meaning. It does not mean any person can be appointed as. He will have to be some professional. So what is professional and what is profession? The Black's Law Dictionary defines profession as a vocation requiring advanced education and training, and a professional, a person who belongs to a learned profession or whose occupation requires high level of training and profiling. Those are the professionals. So who could be those? For example, CS company secretaries could be those, actuaries could be there. Some of the manufacturing companies prefer to have engineers and technical persons in the team of their internal auditors. They also are professionals. So this is about who can be. So CA, cost accountant, other professionals. Now, which are the companies who are supposed to have internal audit system? Obviously, all the listed companies. Unlisted public companies, if their share capital is equal to or more than 50 crore, turnover equal to or more than 200 crore, outstanding loan borrowings from banks or public financial institutions more than 100 crore, and public deposit more than 25 crore. If any of this condition is prescribed, if any of this condition is satisfied, the requirement of internal audit applies. And limits obviously are to be seen as of previous financial year. So private companies also, if they have attained the size, that is turnover of 200 crore or more, or outstanding loan borrowings borrowings from banks or PFI more than 100 crore, then even private companies are mandatory. And many of the auditors of the private company or the management of private company do not know that they have attained this size, and therefore they have to comply with these provisions. So who can be appointed as internal auditors? It could be partnership firm, it could be individual, it could be body corporate, it could be private limited companies also. So individual and body corporate is something which is already clarified by way of rules, the reference of which is given in the slide. One or two questions. So can an employee of the company be appointed as auditor, internal auditor? Yes, this is explanation to Rule 13, which deals with internal audit rules, permits that. He can be an employee. It is not necessary that an outside agency should always be there. So then the question is, can a CA or a cost accountant who is not engaged in practice, can he be appointed? Because in the Companies Act, a chartered accountant is defined as a chartered accountant in practice. For this particular section, then exception is made out by the rule that he could be a CA not in practice, still he can be an internal auditor. Similarly, cost accountant. Who decides or who defines the scope of the internal auditor? Is it senior management team only? The rule has something to say here that where there is audit committee, the audit committee. Otherwise, the board shall formulate the scope, functioning, periodicity, methodology of conducting the internal audit report and churning out of the report of the internal auditors in consultation with the internal auditor. So highest positions have been made to do this showing the importance of the internal auditors. So a question that came to us also is a CA or a cost accountant who is internal auditor, but has been suspended or debarred by the regulators, that is ICAI or ICWAI, that is Cost and Works. Can they continue as internal auditor? Rule, because rule does not require that they should be practicing persons, therefore rule does not mention anything. So therefore such persons can continue as an internal auditor. But it is recommended that they should inform the company that such and such suspensions or such and such debarring or such and such action on them has been taken by the respective regulator. Therefore, the moot question, should the internal auditor be independent? If it is an external sourced internal audit, obviously it has to be an independent. He should give or exhibit his independence. So we come to appointment of auditors, removal, resignation of auditors. Friends, there are several amendments made in this which pertain to companies operating in IFSC, that is International Financial Service Centers, or SEZs. I have not covered them because number one, they are not yet being made operational. They have all come under the 17th Amendment Act. Number one, they have not been made operational. Number two, they are not of much relevance for common practitioners like us, as and when, or if there is any question pertaining thereto, we can deal with that. So who can appoint the auditor? The entire scheme of the Companies Act, New Companies Act, is that if a company is incorporated, the first auditors will have to be appointed by the board of directors within 1 month of the incorporation of the company. The term of that first auditor is only up to the first AGM, that is 1 year. So from the date of incorporation to as and when they are appointed within that 1 month period to the first AGM. Thereafter, in the first AGM, whenever the auditors are appointed, they are appointed by the members at the annual general meeting. And those appointments will not be for 1 year as it used to be in past AGM to AGM. Those appointments will be for a block of 5 years. So first auditor by board of directors till first AGM, thereafter by members at the AGM only for 5 years. As a rule, we should understand that appointment of auditors is always to be made by members at annual general meeting. To this rule, there are 2 exceptions, rather 3 exceptions. One is the first auditor, which can be appointed by board. Another exception is whenever there is a casual vacancy, I'll come to that, which can be filled in by the board. And third exception is in case of a government company, the appointment is also made by board or AGM, but at the behest or at the request or at the order of CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General of India. That's the whole gamut of the provisions about appointment of the Companies Act, of the auditors under the Companies Act. So we have already discussed the tenure of the office as auditor. First auditor will have 1 year. Thereafter, the 5 years. If he is a individual is appointed, if firm is appointed, he can have maximum 2 terms of 5 years. That brings me to a very interesting topic of rotation of auditors, a new concept brought in by the Companies Act, Section 139(2), Rule 5, very, very important. Government feels that if the same auditors remains there for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, then there is a risk of familiarity threat, and therefore rotation would enhance or improve the audit quality. But then rotation does not apply to all the companies. So whom does it apply? All the listed companies, no exception whatsoever. They have to have a rotation, and the provisions pertaining to rotation have been retrospectively made applicable. That means Companies Act 2013 came into effect from 1/4/2014. A transition time of 3 years was given to all the companies to whom rotation was applicable of 3 years. So up to 31st March 17, the same auditors, irrespective of what time they were associated with the company, would continue for those 3 years. After that, that is after April 2017, the rotation fits into play. So those auditors in past, if they have completed 6 or 7 years with the company, they could continue with only 3 years. Those who have completed, so past association of the auditors with the company will have to be considered. Therefore, I am saying that application of the rotation is retrospective for the auditors. So all listed companies, no exemption whatsoever. Public companies which are unlisted, paid up share capital 10 crore or borrowings from bank, financial institutions or public deposit 50 crore or more. Private companies, paid up share capital 50 crore. Here the 50 crore that we are reading is the latest amendment. Earlier it was only 20 crore, and therefore many private companies also had to undergo the rotation problems. Now it is raised to 50 crore under ease of doing business or borrowings from banks, financial institution or public deposits 50 crore. Other companies, other than, so unlisted companies who do not have these thresholds, private companies who do not have these thresholds, and OPC and SPC, for them there is no rotation. After the present auditor has completed one term of 5 years, if he is a proprietor, or 2 terms of 5 years, if the auditor is a firm, a minimum cooling period prescribed is 5 years. For 5 years, he cannot be associated with the company as auditors. Incoming and outgoing firm cannot have a common partner or the same network. The definition of network is there on in the box on the right side. Same network means, or rather includes, the firms operating, functioning hitherto or in future under the same brand name, trade name or common control. So all this would be considered as the same network. Now, many times human mind is mischievous. We all plan, we all try to escape the set provisions of the law. So what happens? The partner of the retiring audit firm who certifies the financial statement of the company, he leaves that firm and joins another firm. Even in such scenario, the rule says that another firm shall also not be eligible to be appointed as auditor. So you can't play around with this rule in this manner. The Companies Act also provides for a joint audit, something that is not new to us. Banks and many government entities, insurance companies, we are aware that more than two or more than two auditors are appointed. Some of the banks have as many as 8 auditors, like organizations like LIC, Life Insurance of Corporation, I believe has 10 auditors. So wherever there are joint auditors, the Companies Act gives an advice to the company that please endeavor to see that all the audit firms do not retire by rotation in the same year, so that you always have the chain running, whereas some of the auditors still continue, the others retire, the new comes in, and the continuing auditors retires in the next year or after 2 years. The procedure for appointment, reappointment, in case wherever there is audit committee shall recommend to the board. Sorry? Sorry?
No, sir. Please continue. There was some disturbance in between.
Yeah. Okay. So, and board shall recommend to the members at AGM. As I said, as a rule, members at AGM should only appoint the auditors, except for those 3 exceptions which I already described. Of course, AC or board are supposed to consider, theoretically or conceptually, if you ask me, any chartered accountant in practice can be appointed auditor. But would that be correct? Say a company, a sole proprietor, having a 200 square feet office in some suburb of Mumbai, becoming an auditor of Reliance Industries or becoming an auditor of Infosys, that is the theoretically yes, but Companies Act requires board and audit committee to consider qualification and experience of the individual or the firm proposed and whether those are commensurate with the size and requirement of the company. Sometimes the businesses of companies are complex and therefore those businesses, the awareness or regulations of those businesses, whether it is there with that auditor, all that needs to be seen by the board. These are the obligations put on the audit committee or the board. The proposed auditor will have to inform the company about any order or any pending proceeding relating to any professional matters of conduct against the auditor before. Presently, I say going forward, maybe an FRA or any competent authority or court. If there is any such matter pending, they should inform the board or audit committee who are appointing, so that their decision becomes an informed decision. The 5 years term, when it came first time in 2013 and effective from 2017, the Companies Act required every year a ratification by the members at general meeting. The requirement of that ratification is now removed, so it is not necessary. Auditor once appointment for 5 years, it is his tenure is 5 years. Obviously, before appointing an auditor, company should ask auditor about his eligibility, willingness in terms of Rule 4 and provisions of Section 141, whether he satisfies the criteria. I'll come to that in the next slide. Company, after appointing, is required to file the notice about appointment of auditor with ROC in the form ADT 1 within 15 days of such this thing. In case the same auditor is not to be reappointed, who is retiring, in that case, a special notice is required. As you all know, the special notice means an explanatory statement will have to be there along with the notice. That casual vacancy, what is meant by casual vacancy? If the office of the auditor gets vacated before the term gets over. So nowadays, if you know, the office of the auditor is who normally appointed is 5 years. In case of CAG, it is 1 year still. It is every year CAG, the advice of the CAG, the government companies, the board appoints the auditors. So if in a government company such casual vacancy arises, the CAG will have to be appointing another auditor within 30 days and fill that vacancy. If for any reason CAG is not able to do that, board can do that within next 30 days. In case of other than government company, if the casual vacancy is happening due to reason other than the resignation. So what those could be reasons that auditor may become not qualified to be auditor. He was qualified when he was appointed, but over the period of years, something happened and his qualification is still not qualified or not eligible to be appointed, or death, or other incapacity to enter into a contract. If those happen, those are the casual vacancies for the reasons other than the resignation. In that case, board can fill the casual vacancy within 30 days. Even the casual vacancies, because of the resignation of the present auditor, in that case also board can fill that, but in that case, approval of company at general meeting has to be taken within 30 days. This is the requirement of the law. And obviously, auditor, whoever is appointed, by whomsoever is appointed, CAG, board, general meeting, to fill the casual vacancy, his tenure would be only till the next AGM. Thereafter, AGM would may reappoint him or somebody else for the term of 5 years. If company decides that retiring auditor is to be reappointed, then that same auditor will have to see that he has not attracted any disqualification. He has not expressed unwillingness to be reappointed, and a resolution at a general meeting is not passed by the company that somebody else in his place to be appointed. If these conditions are satisfied, an auditor can be reappointed, provided within the rotation tenure that we already saw. So therefore, the box here mentions, it's quite an academic question, that at 6th AGM, the retiring auditor auditor, new auditor or same auditor, nothing, AGM has not taken any decision. That normally does not happen, but company law has a provision for 3910, which says if for any reason AGM has not appointed the auditor, the same auditor will continue to remain as an auditor in the office. I consider it as an academic scenario, very rarely happens in the practice. This chart gives us the entire, procedure that one has to go through. Why am I dealing with this in detail? The bottom box, if you read, that will give you a reason. Before accepting appointment as a statutory auditor, it is responsibility of the CA or the firm who is proposed to be appointed to see and ensure that his appointment is proper and under the provisions of the law. If he fails to ensure that and accept such appointment, he is considered to be professionally negligent under the Code of Ethics of ICAI and therefore liable to be punished. Therefore, it is our responsibility to see every time whenever company wishes to appoint us. So, in case of a new company, new client, simple thing, board would appoint you, board would ask you before the board meeting, the letter has to come from the company to the proposed auditor seeking the eligibility and willingness, which has to be responded by the auditor saying that if our appointment, if made, would be within the provisions of the Companies Act. Then board resolution appointing him because he is the first auditor, which can be appointed by board. If not a first auditor, if he is an existing thing, then by general meeting. And after acceptance, the filing of Form 881, which we already saw, with ROC within the timeline prescribed under the Act. If an existing company changes its auditor in the either because of a rotation or because of any other reason, and somebody else is proposed to be appointed, under the provisions of the ICAI Code of Ethics, the incoming auditor has to communicate with the outgoing auditor and get his NOC. The communication as per the ICAI rule has to be by registered AD or any other mode under which he has an acknowledgement with him that he has so communicated. Under the recent clarification of ICAI, a mail communication because of the lockdown position, if such scenario happens, would be considered in due compliance of this particular requirement. If auditor is to be removed, which is made very difficult by the provisions of the Act, what is required is a special resolution required to be passed at the general meeting, and central government approval is required. Of course, the central government has delegated their powers to regional director. So therefore, it is very difficult to remove an auditor, but this is what the procedure one will have to carry if one has decided to remove the auditor who's there who's occupying the obviously special notice is required because requiring a special statement also, explanatory statement. Such notice should be sent to retiring auditor. Retiring auditor has a right to represent before the members at AGM. If he has to say anything, those rights are given to him under the Act, and he can give that representation to the company well in time so that it can be circulated. If it is not circulated by the company for any reason, such retiring auditor has a right to make a representation before the members at the general meeting. Companies Act also give powers to NCLT to remove the auditors in specific circumstances on an application made by central government or any other concerned person. If tribunal is satisfied about the fraudulent actions of the auditor, it can direct the company to change the auditor. The rest all are simple provisions. I'll leave it for the members. Of course, impact of contravention for such attracts the both penalty as well as imprisonment in some cases. Now, Resignation of auditor, I want to speak for a couple of minutes. You all may have noticed from the media report and from the other reports that just to give a this thing that up to March 19, between December 18 and March 19, there were as many as 38 listed company auditors resigned. In all total, up to March 19, I think 100 plus resignations have happened. So let us look into this. If auditor decides to retire, to resign during his term, there is an implementation guide issued by the institute on resignation or withdrawal from an engagement. SEBI has also issued a circular dated 18th October 19. Both of them together summarized manner I have put in this slide what they require. So the auditor who has decided to resign, he has to obtain a written response from the management and those charged with governance. So in most cases, it would be audit committee or board prior to resignation. While filing Form 883, which is a must for a resigning auditor, he himself has to file that form with ROC. The auditor should describe the circumstances which led to such decision of giving the reasons for the resignation. Ambiguous reasons like preoccupation, personal reason, or administrative reason, or health reason will not do. That is not permissible. Auditor should give a valid reason, whatever it could be, like pending or non-payment of fees, fees not being commensurate, management not cooperative, such and such items which is suggested are not followed. Those reasons will have to be come out very, very clearly. This is a requirement. With reference to listed entities, SEBI circular says that if auditor has signed all the quarters in the limited review, as you know, the listed companies are subject to quarterly limited reviews or audit of a financial year, except the last quarter. So he has kind of reviewed or audited all the 3 quarters. Last quarter is pending. Then auditor must finalize the audit report for the said financial year before resignation. He cannot in the last quarter say, I'm resigning, you appoint somebody else. No. Some of our friends would perhaps remember the story of the Manpasand Breweries. I'm taking the name because it is all there in the public domain. The then auditor Deloitte Huskin and Sales decided to resign in few days before the audit committee in the last quarter. Of course, I'm not going into the reasons or validity of that, but what happened was that particular company, Manpasand Breweries, the market cap came down, I mean, got washed away to almost to 70-80%. I'm not saying it happened because of the auditor's resignation, but this immediately started, the share prices immediately started stumbling down from that time. So therefore, SEBI said that if anything such is there, you have done the 3 quarters. So complete the 4th quarter. If you are not happy with the financial statement, if you are not happy with any of the treatment of any of the particular transactions, nothing prevents you from qualification or disclaiming. But complete the audit and then resign. This is must after that. In all other cases, that is 4th quarter is not yet come, auditor should resign after issuing the limited review or audit report for the previous quarter with respect to the date of resignation. So just before the date of audit committee or on the date of audit committee, you can't say that no, we are resigning, you do something else. In that case, you have to first complete whatever is there, due, scheduled to be completed, and then resign. This is what is sum and substance of institute guidance note as well as SEBI. That brings me to eligibility, qualification, disqualifications. I'll not go into the who are eligible. We all know CA in practice or partnership forms. Body corporate, of course, LLP can also be part of that. Otherwise, all other body corporates are not eligible. And partners who are in employment or officer or employee of the company, obviously no, because independence itself is not assured there. Or relatives holding any security or interest in the company or subsidiary of holding company, associate company, they will also not be. Later on, by this rule has been relaxed to say that relatives can hold the security up to certain amount, or loan or guarantee up to certain amount. So let us take a practical cases that relative of A holds security in XYZ amounting to 1.5 lakhs. That is, quantity is 9,000, face value is 10. Would A be considered eligible for appointment? Let me tell you first that the maximum limit that a relative can hold under the rule is 1 lakh face value of 1 lakh. So therefore, Rule 10(1) read with this particular provision provides that such a relative may hold securities in the company because face value is not exceeding 1 lakh. It is up to 90,000. Now, given the same case, the facts are same case, would A be disqualified if the XYZ issue the right and A is taking that right and therefore face value goes up to, instead of 90,000, goes up to 1.5 lakhs? In that case also, Rule 10(1) says that in such event where relative is crossing the limit of 1 lakh face value, the corrective action will have to be taken by such relative to maintain the limit within 1 lakh face value within 60 days. If that is not done, then auditor becomes incapacitated or ineligible to continue as auditor. So what will be the second scenario? Relative of A, instead of equity shares, acquires non-convertible debentures. The limit is not with reference to the equity shares, it is with reference to any security in the company. Therefore, it may be equity shares, may be preference shares, may be NCDs, may be CDs, may be any other security. Face value of 1 lakh is the maximum limit. That will have to be seen before auditor decides about his eligibility. So there are other criteria about eligibility. A person or his relative or a partner is indebted to the company or subsidiary or holding or associate company. Here, limit is up to 5 lakhs, not up to 1 lakh. In the security holding, limit was up to 1 lakh. Here it is 5 lakhs. So let us take a case, let us understand this case and the next case. Next case is a person who's or his relative or a partner has given a guarantee or provided any security in connection with the indebtedness of any third person. Here again the limit is 1 lakh. Let us understand both these cases with help of that chart. Suppose the auditor that we are talking about is auditor of the company C in the chart. So C, as we can see from the chart, is a subsidiary of A, X is another subsidiary, Y is associate of C, B is subsidiary of C and therefore step down subsidiary of A, and Z is a subsidiary of an associate. So who all are covered for this limits of holding the security, limits for being indebted to the company, or limits for the guarantee? So it says company, subsidiary, holding or associate, or subsidiary of such holding company. So in our case, if we are examining it with reference to C, all these companies will be covered, A, X, Y, and B, but Z will not be covered. Because section is talking about the company itself, holding, subsidiary, and fellow subsidiary. That is subsidiary of a holding company, that is fellow subsidiary. So this will have to be understood because this kind of preventions were earlier not there in the company law, though some of these preventions were there in a code of ethics. We have to understand that now this has become part of the act. Again, a person is not supposed to have a business relationship with the audit client, that company which is appointed him or proposing to appoint him as. Now this business relationship, the term will have to be understood here again with the company, subsidiary, holding or associate company or subsidiary of such holding company. All this entire group will have to be understood. So business relationship would mean that sale and purchase transactions or any commission or fee transactions, that such transactions should not be there. Within that, some of the business relationships have been exempted. Suppose a company is a telecommunication company, or a company is an insurance service provider company, or a company is any say electricity generation company, and and you are auditor of that company, but you are also consumer of that company. In such cases, if those sale and purchase happen at the arm's length, then those things are. But let us see some of other case studies. A tax auditor to the company, can he be appointed as auditor? Yes, there is nothing to prevent that. Both requires an independence, and therefore it can be done. Mr. A CEO of Airtel, which is what I said while explaining the business relationship, can he be appointed as auditor of Bharti Airtel? Yes, that is what is exempted. Such kind of business relationships are not to be taken as obstacle, so long as they are in ordinary course of business of the company at arm's length price. Like all other customer, I am also charged for my telephone based on a consumption or my internet services based on my data usage. In that case, I do not incur ineligibility. A person who is related with a director or is in employment of a company as a director or KMP, in that case, independence is jeopardized. You are not eligible. Within full-time employment elsewhere, a CA practice is a full-time practice and audit practice is more so. Therefore, if anyone is full-time employment elsewhere, he cannot be an auditor. This has to be understood with proper reference to context. Those chartered accountants who are lecturers in degree colleges, those are treated as a full-time employment. Although the working hours may be from early morning, maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning to 10, 10:30. But those are in whole-time employment, and those CAs cannot be an auditor of a company. That is the. At the date of such appointment or reappointment, holding the appointment, auditor should not be an auditor of 20 companies. This limit was there in the 1956 Act also. The difference was that we were not considering the private companies for this thing. The new provision says except OPC, government companies, small companies, private companies having paid up capital less than 100 crores is the new amendment which came in 2016. When the Companies Act became active from 13 to 16, it was not there. So therefore, private companies also had to be counted or calculated for the limit of 20 companies. Now a substantial relief is given because private companies having share capital, paid up share capital of 100 crores are only to be counted. So that's a substantial relief. Anyone who is convicted by a court for an offense involving fraud for up to 10 years is obviously not ineligible under the provisions of the law, and who have directly or indirectly rendered any service referred to in section 144 of the Companies Act. We'll come to that. Remuneration part, who appoints and who decides the remuneration. So in case of a first appointment, board is making, and therefore board can decide. Otherwise, general meeting appoints auditors and general meeting can decide the remuneration. But in most cases, practically general meeting empowers somebody, either the board or some director or some managing director or some officer of the company, to decide about the remuneration of the auditor. If that is so in the resolution, that can be done. Remuneration obviously includes fees payable and all that. I would like to draw the attention on the box on the right hand side. This is under ICAI rule, and many of us tend to ignore it or tend to kind of not see it properly. This rule makes it mandatory that fees for other services provided by the auditors, excluding such services which are regulatory required to be performed by statutory auditors, should not exceed 100% of the audit fees. This is to ensure that auditors' attention is not diverted to other services, and therefore audit quality does not get impaired. So in a case where you are auditing a company, your fees is say rupees 50,000, but tax advisory fees, provided it is permitted and provided you are following, you are giving that service. If we say 2.5 lakhs or 3 lakhs, this provision of ICAI will have to be kept in mind so that you are not on the wrong side of the particular provision. Powers, of course, we are all aware, right to access all the books, all the records required for the audit, entitled to inquire the officers. Now the Companies Act gives the power to a auditor of a parent company even to access to subsidiary records and questioning subsidiaries to the extent of CFS reporting. Many of us tend to forget, we all know CARO because CARO is there in every report, whether any reportable fact is there or not. So fixed asset verification done by the company, no major discrepancies, okay, that would be written. But there are other inquiries mandatorily to be made. CARO is under 143.11. This is under 143.1. These are 6 inquiries to be made. And if anything found wrong or if anything found improper or misleading, in that case only we have to report. But in the process of audit, we have to report on these inquiries. And therefore, these are already, they were there in the old Act also, and they are pretty much same in the new Act. So I only want to draw the attention that one does not ignore such matters.
Hasmukh sir, we are nearing time.
Yeah. So now it's all theory. Now it's all theory. I'll only spend 5 minutes on COVID. This case studies are simple. No interpretational or no issues about this thing. In case of fraud, responsibility 143.12 requires auditor that fraud which he himself has found out to be first informed to the company, get the explanation. If the amount of fraud, if he has determined, is likely to be less than 1 crore, in that case, inform the audit committee or board. If it is more than 1 crore, to be informed to the central government by filing Form 884 to the central government. There's a guidance note, very, very useful publication of Institute, guiding auditors on these processes. These are the restricted services because clearly they are in a conflict of audit, this thing, accounting, internal audit, design. All this is, not in keeping with your independence as auditor. But the last item in this management service is something that is not defined in the Act. Therefore, one will have to understand it in a proper context in which it is made. Management consultancy service is something which is dealt with in the Code of Ethics of ICAI, but management service is something which is not defined anywhere. Therefore, management services are those services where you, in course of providing of those services, you take decisions for and on behalf of the company management. Such services should not be provided, in nutshell. Rest of all that is there already in the slides. I'll not spend time on that. So this 144 is very wide application, directly, indirectly. So it covers the entire gamut of the company, group, parent, associate, etc. So therefore, directly, indirectly also will have to be understood in a proper reference. Auditor is duty bound to attend general meeting where annual accounts are supposed to be approved. If auditor himself cannot be, any of his assistant who is a qualified chartered accountant can remain present in the this thing. Otherwise, in the old Act as well as new Act, auditor has a right to receive notices of all the general meetings. Whether he needs to appoint all general meetings, that is other than the annual general meeting, I think auditor can avoid doing that by sending a mail to the company expressing his inability. But AGM, he or some of his representatives should attend. This I'll skip. These are the reading material for the COVID impact. I'll only take 5. Charvik, I'll take about 5 to 7 minutes. Of course, this I said in the beginning is a subject by itself, which can take 1.5 hours. This is the reading material that those who want to do. Institute in March has given this accounting and auditing advisory. Thereafter came out with so many publications, sub-publications about going concern, about physical verification of inventory, because movements are restricted. So how do you do that? Auditors reporting pertaining to some of the key audit considerations, subsequent event. You know that when you are signing the audit report, company's business is almost come to the standstill. In that case, how do you take care of those while reporting? All those advice is there containing here. Those who are doing bank branch audits, specific considerations while conducting distance audit or remote audit based on the digital data provided by the branch, what care should be taken and what are the items to be seen with focus is guided in the last publication. Very small, brief, very useful, crisp publications. I would strongly recommend to go through that. So in the accounting, what are the main concerns? Going concern assessment would become very, very important because some of the businesses we all know, like aviation or entities providing services to aviation, have almost kind of stopped. Last 3 months, no flights, nothing. So what will happen to those companies? Going concern of that needs to be properly checked. Tour and travel company, hotel company, hospitality companies, organized retail companies, all malls. They are not operating for last 3 months, and one doesn't know when they'll begin operating. What will happen to those companies? Impairment of non-financial asset is another item to be seen with a focus. Inventory measurement and verification is one such subject when 1 hour is not enough to speak on. I'll deal with if there are any questions on that. But this guidance is giving a proper thing that if restrictions on the movement on you or a client thing, in that case, what are the alternate procedures that you can perform? It is referring to auditing standard 501, which is covering the inventory valuation, verification, etc. Accounting estimates and judgments, because you know pretty much that businesses have a challenges in those cases, whether those estimates, judgments, etc. would hold true or not. Modification to any contracts, arrangements, revenue, expected credit loss under the Ind AS. The lease contracts where you are doing Ind AS 116 accounting involves estimates of interest rate, etc. Borrowing costs, again, you have some judgments and estimates. Income taxes, of course, several relaxations have been given, but the rate relaxation was already given before. One will have to consider that. Subsequent events and provisions. SEBI has also issued a circular on 20th May advising companies to give both qualitative and quantitative disclosures properly to all the stakeholders. These are some of the instances that listed companies have put in their financial statements, which are already there in a public domain. Therefore, I am giving the names of those companies. This is already there in the public domain. So Saint-Gobain has says, big note, I'm not reading, I'll only read the blue portion, that uncertainty is associated with nature and duration. That is the impact of COVID. The company itself is saying uncertainty. The Blue Star had said would be, the estimates would be recognized in the financial statement when material changes to economic conditions arise. So on the date of signing of financial statements, companies are not sure of what turn the situation will take. Similar cases of Biocon. Infosys note is also very interesting because it says that in developing the assumptions relating to possible future uncertainties. Now, these are all uncertainties on the date of signing of the accounts. Therefore, these are the notes companies have given to the financial statements. So therefore, likewise, like just as accounts, there are focus areas in the audit also, which are also covered in the guidance note of the institute. Risk assessment, materiality, and all that. Those would impact the auditor's report. So auditors can deal with these items in a several ways. Qualification wherever necessary, disclaimer wherever felt necessary, emphasis matter wherever he is not sure about what company is saying about future uncertainty is right or wrong. Going concern also can be given a note, qualification, etc. Again, in the next few slides, I have given the examples of some of the public listed companies already there in the public domain, how auditors have dealt with the uncertainty about the COVID impact and certain other things. So Yes Bank auditors have given this, interesting to read. Benko Products also has given an emphasis matter of this. Most auditors have preferred emphasis matter. If you see the trend of so far published accounts, many companies have also given other matters, which is something to do with the audit process or auditing process. There, in other matters, they are saying what they have been able to do and what they have not been able to do. So here, for example, the company is saying we were not able to physically observe the verification of inventory that was carried out by the management. Consequently, we have performed the alternative procedure. This is what exactly SA 501 says, and that company says they have done, and therefore they have put it in a other matter. There are few companies which have covered the COVID-related impact in their audit report as part of key audit matters. Havells India, for example, because key audit matter would be lengthy, I have not given here. Those who are interested can see it is already there in the public domain. That's all. Although I had to run through in the as I said, the COVID impact itself could have taken a full session. Any questions, Charvik? I shall be glad to.
Yeah, there are 3 to 4 questions which have come up. I'll just read it out one by one.
Okay.
First question is whether a chartered accountant who is in employment in a particular company can be the internal auditor of that same company.
Yes, he can be. The rule 13 of the internal audit rules does not prohibit that. In the interest of the company, that company when they are appointing their own employee as internal audit, they should see that he is independent for the audit areas that he is expected to work on. So if he is administratively reporting to MD or a CFO, is okay. But actually he should be reporting to a director or to audit committee chairman to get a proper effective result out of such internal audit.
Okay. Next question is, what will be the presentation of CSR expenses in financial statements and director's report? Maybe
in the financial statement, ICAI has already issued a guidance note and given a guidance about what and how to be disclosed. So in a regular manner or in a descriptive manner, you can describe what company is required to spend and how much it has spent and on which part it has spent. And if there is any obligation made by the company, out of that obligation, some part is spent and some part is not spent. Those are all the disclosures to be made as per the guidance note of ICAI on the CSR expenses. Whereas board, in the board report, will have to give a detailed explanation if they have short spent or not spent.
Okay. Next question is, what details are required under development and risk management policy in board report? Director's report.
That depends from the company to company. A company which is seeing its business revival very bleak, company sees a pessimistic view, will have to give a detailed thing as to how they propose to revitalize or restart, re-begin, open again kind of this thing. There are companies whose immediate turnover or profitability may have been impacted, but they are hopeful that this problem will not last long. Their business scenario of April or May, although subdued, but is not very bad, and therefore those companies will have different kind of connotations to this disclosure. They might give in a different form. And against all these, there may be some companies who have actually had some opportunity because of these problems. The pharma companies, some ready-to-eat industries, maybe some examples who actually have no impact on their, or no material impact on their running business or profitability. According to perception of the company, they will have to kind of suitably mold their disclosures in the board report as also in the note to the financial statement, because auditors will have to consider what management is saying in the financial statement. Based on that, he has to decide how he deals with it in the audit report, whether as a qualification, whether as a disclaimer, whether as a emphasis matter, whether as the other matter, or whether as a key audit matter.
Okay. Next question is, If a company is having 50% of total assets in shares and 50% of the income from share income, whether it will be treated as NBFC. And suppose if it has to be registered in NBFC and it has not done, so what will be the impact in audit report?
So, CARO 2016 has a last question in the CARO that if whether the company is required to be registered under Section 45 IA of the RBI Act, and if yes, whether it has done so. In the example that you gave, Charvik, that more than what we commonly know as a 50-50 rule, if more than 50% of your assets are financial assets and more than 50% of your revenues are generated from the financial assets, in that case, you are duty bound to register yourself as NBFC under Section 45 IA. And further, there are several conditions like your net own fund should be at least 2 crore. If you are not that big, you should always take care to see that you are not meeting both these 50-50 conditions. Break one of that. So in one of the year, break that income condition, one of the year, break the asset condition by doing some transaction which satisfies the auditors to say that company is not required to register under Section 45. I hope that satisfies the. Yeah, Charvik? Hello?
Yes, sir. Next question is, what type of alternative procedure? In continuation of this question, suppose there is an additional information that if the company has excess fund and the fund has been invested in equity shares and the only income is coming from those shares, so then also it will be considered as AFC.
Is that the main business of the company? What is the main object of the company? If that is the main object of the company, then obviously company will have to be ready for its 50-50 rule.
No, it is not the main object of the company. Company has an excess fund and it has invested in shares.
So that is becoming more than 50% in terms of asset and more than 50% in terms of income, the financial part, right?
Yes.
That is what I'm trying to say. Such companies will have to take care always that they do not come into this trap of 50-50 rule. They'll have to kind of plan their affairs in such a way that one of the 50 is not satisfied.
Okay.
There are several ways and ways to do that. On a public platform, I cannot say that. Okay.
Yes, sir. Next question is, what type of alternative procedures will have to be done with respect to inventory verification in present condition due to lockdown?
Yeah, so there is a publication of the ICI also refers to that. Then you have SA 501 giving you guidance. Number one, if for the restrictions on the movement, you yourself are not in position to be present as auditor, your audit staff or audit team is not able to be present. But supposing client is able to verify the inventory, there are several other ways. That one is ask the client to do the videography of their stock taking. If possible, let it be a live videography. Most of the clients have CCTV cameras in their stores, etc. With that, if they can give you an access, you have a book record with you wherever you are sitting at your home or so. You are online watching them doing the verification. First of all, ascertain whether the verification process is properly followed. Verification process is not where storekeeper himself is verifying the store's item. No, the custodians of the stock verifying is not a stock verification. Company should ensure that somebody else goes and verifies. So somebody from the, say, accounts department, somebody from the other departments, functional departments, HR department, they go and do it. Verify that and be in touch with that person who is verifying. If you have a book stock with you, ask it to walk to the specific bin or a specific place where you want to verify and see how much of those. This kind of procedure you can do it. Retain those evidences of videography. Retain those processes that you have done, and roll forward and roll backward. If you are not doing on the financial year end, but say you are doing somewhere in the May or June. In most companies, May end itself or mid-May also would be as good as March, because there is no movement only. So therefore, roll forward, roll backward may not be necessary, but wherever inward or outward has happened after that, after this thing, then on the verification date, work on the roll forward, roll backward date and determine the quantities that should be there, and determine the physical quantities as measured, as counted or as verified by the person shown to you over a photography or shown to you in some other digital medium. That is also an alternate procedure. This is just one example. There are several others listed in the guidance note as well as SFI 01.
Okay. As of now, these are the questions which I have received. And since time is also up, we can conclude with the Q&A session.
Okay.
Thank you, sir, for the detailed explanation on the Companies Act. I would request CA Raj Kona to present a formal vote of thanks to today's speaker. One second.
Hello. Sir, it is my privilege to propose a hearty vote of thanks to CA Hasmukh Dedia on behalf of the KDOC Association. Sir, your presentation was a very detailed and excellent presentation. Your talk was very lucid, and on behalf of the association, we thank you for accepting our invitation for this webinar. The topic you covered were very relevant to auditors, and the coverage on the guidance note, the relevant provisions of the Companies Act was very lucidly and explained to the audience. It is we highly appreciate your talk, sir. A special thanks to you for the very detailed presentation slides, which would be very useful to the participants for future reference also. So we thank you, sir, for your excellent talk. Our organization under the leadership of President Ghanshyam Bhai, Vice President Gautam Bhai, and Secretary Hitesh Bhai have been organizing this webinar series in the last 3 months, and we have organized a dozen webinar series, more than 12 webinar series in this 3 months. All the response to all the webinar series has been very encouraging. I thank all the participants in this who have been participating in this entire webinar series for their participation throughout. I would also like to thank all the committee members, our coordinator, and the person who has been the backbone of this webinar series, Charvik Momaya, who has been handling all the webinars, the technology part of it. Our other committee members, Divya Ben, Paulomi Ben, Nita Ben, Payal, Devang, all of them, they have been doing an excellent job. I also request all the members, all the chartered accountants, cost accountants, and the company secretaries of our community to register and be life members of the association. We also have a YouTube channel wherein you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, and all our webinars are available on the YouTube channel. Our next webinar is on the new ITR forms, what are the merits of ITR filing, and it will be taken up by our past president of the association, CA Padam Poladia, sir, and our secretary, CA Hitesh Dharamsi. I request all the participants to join us for the next webinar on 27th, and thank the speakers, our committee members, and all the participants for joining this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Charvik. My contact details are already there. Any questions or not? All participants are welcome to communicate.
Thank you very much, Hasmukh Bhai.
Thanks.
I'll be closing the session. Thank you.